Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of InnoEthics Live, the podcast show where we talk about AI and emerging technologies, focusing on subjects such as governance and ethics, security, privacy, autonomy in the digital world, and the impacts of emerging technologies generally upon society. By combining the philosophical humanitarian perspective with a technical scientific one, the aim of the InnoEthics Live podcast is to discuss these global issues from a point of view that takes into consideration the many facets of these discussions.
Coming from different backgrounds, both of our focus subjects, but also from different countries, and having met at a conference that celebrates youth global cooperation, Allegra and I seek to emphasize the importance of a global perspective on these topics.
You're back with your hosts, Allegra Cuomo
and Daria Janbale.
Talking about this week, we're gonna first talk about some fun AI news or something in the AI sphere that we want to bring to you guys, and then afterwards we're going to be talking about AI governance across the world and how the AI governance approaches for different nations and country blocks differs approaching their AI strategy and how politics plays a massive role in the way that AI governance is done across the world. My fun thing about AI this week is the book I'm reading at the moment, because I'm reading a lot of different books on technology, on AI, on consciousness and how this can be applied to AI consciousness. And this week's selection is specifically Super Agency, What Could Possibly Go Right with Our AI Future by Reid Hoffman and Greg Beto. Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn, for those of you who are not familiar with him, and he is a very prominent tech pioneer and is super involved in the evolution of AI in the last decade, especially when it comes to generative AI and how we can make sure that AI aligns with human values and intentions while fostering innovation. So something that I really like that he talks about in the book is something that we're also really passionate about here on the InnoEthics Live podcast, because he talks about how we need to be balancing that ethical and human focus of AI and AI regulation, but not hampering all the brilliant progress and development we're doing with AI and other emerging technologies. So making sure that this regulation is still allowing for innovation and continuation of development, but not being too lax, and still addressing the major concerns that we do also have with the potential negative consequences that ungoverned and unregulated AI and emerging technology might lead to. So yeah, I'm not finished with the book yet. I'm really enjoying it, but I promised Daria that once I was done I'd give her a review, and it'll probably be
I'm
featured.
still waiting for it.
She's still waiting for it. It'll be there soon. And it will probably be featured in my InnoEthics Shelf newsletter, where I write down all the books I've read recently on AI, just so you guys can get a bit more of an introduction into some literature in the AI field. For the time being, Daria's going to introduce her fun AI thing for this episode, and then we're going to talk about the main topic for today. So yeah, Daria, what have you got to share with us this week?
I wanted to share about a new tool that came out these past weeks. Vibe coding seems to have become such a popular thing in recent times, but finally people are seeing its flaws. People are opening their eyes towards the security issues that vibe coding their websites or application creates. It's not necessarily their fault because people that are not from the IT field don't necessarily know what needs to be in a website for it to be fully functional or fully safe. Why I mention this is because in the past weeks, OpenAI Aardvark was released. This is a new AI security researcher that scans code bases for known vulnerabilities and security issues. I think this will be great because people will finally see that making a website is not that easy, even with vibe coding. And also, it's going to point out what their website or app is missing in terms of security so they can work towards it and nobody's personal information ends up on the web.
So this is really cool. I want to check it out as fast as possible just to see how well it works on my own programs.
And I think what's really interesting is a lot of us don't even realize we're using vibe coding. Like,
Yeah,
I can
my
see Daria's
bad.
face right now light up at that.
Basically, vibe coding is you go to a website and you give a description of website you want to build or application. And the website you're on just basically builds it itself. It codes the entire website. You give like prompts on what to edit, what to change, what colors to use, what functionality it needs to have. And it's basically done in very little time.
Rather than hiring computer science specialists, you just vibe with it. So
Try out different ideas, and somehow the website just comes up on its own from this AI. But if you want to hear my idea of it, you can use it to generate ideas and like be aware of how you want it to look and have it as a draft. But you need to have a professional look at it to and work on it to make sure that it's safe to upload it in the cloud and have people use it. Because safety is such a big issue, not just about people's credentials, but also how it works. Because especially if you're creating a website regarding retail store, like if you want to have a shopping website for your new brand, you're going to need to work with credit cards. And if that information is not safe and it's stolen, it's very bad. And not just for the people whose information is stolen, but also for the person who made the website and the brand itself, because it's not going to last if you're having vulnerabilities in your website and people's credentials are stolen left and right.
Yeah, that sounds like something that's really important, that really needs to be like taken into consideration when using this new tech, which again comes to the central point that we always like to talk about in InnoEthics, like the fact that these new technologies, there's so many great opportunities and so much great stuff that can come out of them. But it's important that, yeah, everything's done in a way that is managed and regulated in a way that remembers to protect the consumer as well.
Exactly.
Great. So moving on to the topic of today's episode, we're going to talk about AI governance and why it's of such critical importance, and globally how different approaches are taken by countries. And this can often depend on their government overall, like the political climate of the specific country. And we're also going to touch on why AI is something that needs to be considered politically and shouldn't be treated in its own environment, its own microcosm, and is something that we need to understand impacts every single facet of society. For some of the major economic and political superpowers of the last century, they've all got quite contrasting main models that prioritize different aspects of AI regulation or a lack of AI regulation. So firstly, Daria is going to take us through the EU's model. Tell us about the EU and its app.
Well, we're starting with EU because Allegra is based in UK and I'm based in Netherlands, but we're both from European countries. So she's from Italy, I'm from Albania and Kosovo. The EU is basically a risk-based model. Its regards towards AI is by building regulations, and especially this big document that's super important, which is the Artificial Intelligence Act of Europe, or European Union AI Act. It prioritizes the protection of fundamental rights and ensuring consumer trust in AI systems, with a guiding principle being that AI system should serve people, not the other way around. So people serving AI, that's not what it's about.
the AI Act
Was a landmark document. It's comprehensive and it's applied across all sectors and mandatory for anyone developing an AI system within the EU market. It's very good that the EU made this document because we really need to have rules and regulations toward how we build AI system, because many people are not aware of what issues it may have, what the complications and the downsides of AI can be. Therefore, these regulations are super important for companies that use AI. Basically, going back to AI Act, it contains a risk pyramid structure with 4 tiers that determine the legal obligations for the provider or the developer. So this approach, it can be potentially not allowing for the same speed and level of innovation that other approaches countries or continents might follow, but it provides a clear framework that offers the highest level of trust, accountability, and legal certainty for users and organizations. So basically, the way EU is working is let's be safe and then innovate. Let's make sure that we're taking care of the people rather than just working on somebody's ego that they can do something. If you want to do something, do it right from the start rather than deal with the repercussions of it later. And now Allegra is going to talk about the US model.
Yeah, I think just before I talk about the US, I wanted to, coming on to that last point, I really liked how you highlighted regulate and then innovate. This means that we avoid the trap of ethical debt, which is something that I talk about quite a lot whenever discussing the subject, and a concept that's really starting to pick up traction in these fields because it's kind of a play on technical debt, in the sense that when you're designing a system, it is so much more cost effective and time effective to build the system with all the correct parameters in place rather than having to go back once you've already built the system and having to change things from the inside. And it's kind of the same with ethics within technology systems.
Also, if I speak from a technical point of view, it's easier to take care of it from the beginning rather than deal with it later. Because once you build something, it's harder to change it to work with something else rather than do it the right way from the start.
So from the point of view of ethical debt, exactly what Daria was saying, if we can go into all these new developments that is happening with the correct regulatory frameworks already in mind, then we can be building these and developing these technologies and this new AI with these ethics already in the system, and therefore it's not something that we then have to go back and spend lots of time, spend lots of money refixing because these technologies don't comply with regulations. And on that note, we're going to be moving to a quite different approach, which is a US sectoral and voluntary model with the idea of self-regulation and very much pro-innovation approach. So the US's approach favours minimal legislative interference and has allowed for the private sector to be the lead in global AI innovation, with many key figures in the sector actually criticising an approach that doesn't allow for the free innovation and free development of AI, because we, and I quote, won't be able to reach its full potential if these technologies and the development of these technologies is hampered by too many regulations. However, at the same time, every year since the release of ChatGPT in 2022, scientists and technologists have come together to discuss how development on AI and on superintelligence, for example, should be paused until more AI regulation and governance has been established and implemented, because there are fears that once we get to a certain point, it's going to be too late to go back and then regulate these technologies. They're going to be developed past a point where regulation can then step in easily. And it's going to be, like we were saying, really time ineffective, really cost ineffective, and also just might not be possible in the same parameters than if we start this development with a regulatory and effective ethical framework already in place. The most recent iteration of this letter that calls for the pause on certain types of AI development without specific governance has been signed by over 800 public figures, including AI godfathers like Jeffrey Hinton and Yoshua Bengio, as well as massive tech figures such as Steve Wozniak. The US relies currently on existing federal agencies to enforce AI principles within their domains, and much of the recent federal guidance has come through executive orders. While these direct federal agencies on how to use AI safely, they do not directly regulate the private sector in a way a legislative act would. We can see by how celebrity-like and public technology figures have become in the last couple of years in the US to show how this private sector is really leading the way. There was also the release in 2022 of the Blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights by the Biden administration, which outlined 5 principles for the design, use, and deployment of automated systems. However, again, the document is a framework and guidance, it's not a law. The US approach keeps the US agile and competitive in the AI development field, meaning they can quickly move from one area to another when it comes to AI development. However, by lacking a specific regulatory framework, there are concerns around a lack of consistent accountability for private AI developers and how the technology is being implemented, potentially leaving significant safety gaps. Well, these need to be addressed. Now, conversely to these two approaches, Daria is going to be talking about China's state-led governance model when it comes to AI governance.
What Allegra just said means that China is developing AI in a form that aligns with its national values. According to Forbes' article on how the 3 approaches compare, the Chinese government sees AI as a strategic technology that can help it achieve its economic and geopolitical goals, and therefore has been actively promoting the development and adoption of AI. However, obviously, there have also been concerns surrounding privacy and civil liberties, with the government having been known to use AI for surveillance, censorship, and social control purposes. Generative AI, and I quote, must uphold the integrity of state power, refrain from inciting secession, safeguard national unity, preserve economic and social order, and ensure the development of products aligning with a country's values. As an economic tool, the country is deeply committed to investing in AI across sectors and account for nearly one-fifth of global private investing funding in 2021, based on Forbes. Now, Allegra is going to continue talking more about the UK AI approach.
Unlike the EU AI Act, it doesn't have a singular comprehensive legislation or regulatory framework governing AI. And because in the last 18 months we've had a change in government, we can look to the Labour manifesto as to what Labour was campaigning for when it came to AI regulation before they came into power in July 2024 last year. So the Labour manifesto indicated an intention to implement specific regulation for AI in the UK, and this represented a departure from the previous Conservative government approach that really wanted a pro-innovation approach, more similarly to the US's approach. And the Labour manifesto pledged, and I quote, to ensure the safe development use of AI models by introducing binding regulation on a handful of companies developing the most powerful AI models. So we can interpret this that the most prominent and largest AI companies would be the ones that any regulation would probably focus on. And proposed initiatives in this document relate to AI by including the establishment of a regulatory innovation office to assist existing regulators in updating existing research programs by creating the National Data Library to help deliver data-driven public services, and also committing to long-term funding for research and development, which I think would be so beneficial to the UK, because a lot of what I've been reading about lately has included some things about whether the AI war is slipping out of the grasp of the UK if we compare it to other superpowers such as the ones we were just discussing. This is a notion that was actually reiterated a talk I went to at the Italian embassy a couple of weeks ago. The focus of this seminar was on AI security and defense and how AI can be used in these sectors. Someone asked a question of why the UK has already lost the AI war, and part of the reason, according to the panel, was the fact that in comparison to the huge amounts of investment that we're hearing about in the EU, in China, in the US, in India as well, the huge levels of investment that is going into AI development in these countries, but also things like AI research funding for these initiatives, we're just not reaching the same level of funding here in the UK. Therefore, hearing this commitment to long-term funding for research and development sounds like something that could have a real impact on improving and increasing the UK's stance on AI governance.
Why do you think UK is so behind on AI development and it's having such issues?
I think this is partly to do with having taken a long time to officially leave the EU and not having had enough time to develop their own regulatory organisations and regulatory offices. And at the same time, the proliferation of AI in our society happening far quicker than any regulation in any country could catch up with. It's meant that these factors mean that A, the UK government hasn't had enough time to catch up with it. B, no longer being in the EU, meaning we're no longer able to be a part of their regulatory approach. C, there is just less funding than there used to be in these sectors. Probably also having to take into this consideration this change from previous Conservative government's pro-innovation approach to now the Labour government's more regulated approach, and there just hasn't been enough time for this change to happen at a quick enough rate. Therefore, the UK is lagging behind when it comes to both development and effective regulation and strategy. At the moment, the UK does have a very context-specific approach while these regulatory frameworks are still being set up. So existing regulators such as the Financial Conduct Authority, the Information Commission Office, Ofcom, and everything that was said within the Online Safety Act as well, these are all tasked with interpreting and applying these principles within their own sectors. And then these regulators then come together working as the Digital Regulation Corporation Forum and engaging in overlapping policy areas to deliver a coherent and coordinated approach to digital regulation for both consumers and businesses. The rationale is that they are designed to be pro-innovation and flexible and avoiding stifling bureaucracy, so that for the time being, there can still be agile AI development, but there is still a form of regulation by working with the regulators. However, concerns involve not having a robust AI framework means understanding, interpreting, and applying laws and regulations will be more difficult and less efficient, and more likely to hinder effective innovation in the long term if there are harmful consequences of AI deployment and usage. On that note, Daria is now going to talk about Albania and Kosovo's AI approach and giving a different perspective on how they're looking at things.
Starting off with Albania, it has an interesting view on AI. It's been a big news, at least for Albanians, but also like other countries in Europe, to notice how Albania is having an AI Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence is Dila, which from Albanian to English it means son. It's very interesting because it started off as a virtual assistant integrated into the government platform, which is eAlbania, and it is used to assist citizens with online public services and issuing digital documents. So somehow from that position, it's an AI minister. And I think that's the first of its kind because personally, I've never heard any country ever employing an AI as a minister. The reason for this decision from the Prime Minister, Edi Rama, was because he plans to have procurement responsibilities to be transferred to it in order to produce political influence in tender procedures. So it's basically targeting corruption. In Albania, we have a big problem with it because if you have a person in high places or if you got money, you can skip lines, you can take care of the stuff you need to do. And a big part of Albania integrated into the European Union was dealing with this issue. So our prime minister's idea was let's make an AI minister that takes care of this. So no corruption can happen.
Hopefully, a person is appointed to oversee it, but this is still up to discussion.
But this is already made a decision for Dila's children because it's pregnant with assistance to help the other human ministers, which is very funny to have this idea of an AI being pregnant. Like, how can an AI be pregnant? But it makes sense because these assistants will help the other ministers follow EU legislations. And for example, the child will say what was said when the member was not in the hall, and if the member's name was mentioned, and if they have to counterattack someone who mentioned someone for the wrong reasons. So it's going to be there for like recap purposes, protection purposes, and just informational basis. It makes sense to have like huge concerns, not just by the Albanian population, but also European populations in itself, because it has a legitimacy risk, cybersecurity risk, and also risk of reliance on foreign AI, because it is heavily based on OpenAI and ChatGPT. It's pretty popular that Mira Murati was one of the OpenAI team members. She's Albanian. So what our prime minister has done is strike a deal with her into helping create Dila and then striking a deal to use ChatGPT to. As for Kosovo, there are no dedicated AI laws or AI strategies yet. It's mostly just about becoming an entrepreneurial hub for the new generation. And this includes AI and its usage or inclusion. And it's not just about AI, but cybersecurity as well. We got a lot of people that are working towards these two pretty big fields at the moment. And I really can't wait to see what they come up with. As for data protection and privacy laws, Kosovo has legislations on data protection, which is largely aligned with EU principles. And in a sense, this can be translated also to AI strategies because if we want to protect the data, whether it's AI or a business or a human, they need to align by these laws. Also, there's the cybersecurity and digital transformation strategies, such as Kosovo's Digital Agenda 2030 and other digital government strategies that include components relating to trust, interoperability, and digital services. As for the media and ethics updates, the Kosovo Press Council updated its code of ethics in February of 2024 to explicitly refer to responsible use of AI as in principles of data protection and transparency in media. So it's starting to take a step toward using AI and having rules and regulations about it, but there's still nothing concrete about it. Now it's time to wrap up our second episode for InnoEthics.
Yeah, thank you, Daria, for talking to us about Kosovo and Albania. I think it's really interesting to hear how countries from all over the world are looking at, and obviously this is just a small handful of them as well, but how they are all looking and having their own approaches to the responsible use of AI and AI governance as a whole. Watch out for the next few episodes where we're going to be talking about topics such as bias in machines, AI companions, if AI can truly ever be your friend, and the impact of jobs. And that's something that a lot of people are really concerned about when it comes to AI. Thank you so much for listening to our episode this week, and we hope you are looking forward to our next episode. Check us out on LinkedIn and Instagram, and also on Be the Change Media Network.
And if you liked today's episode, share it with your friends and family, leave a comment, and let us know what you want to hear more about.
Once again, thank you so much, everyone. This was this week's episode of InnoEthics Live. We look forward to seeing you next time.